Mr. Greer, I take no pleasure in us being here again, but do you recall when I sentenced you on the 20th of December that I went through certain things that you were expected to do at that point in time? All right, you remember that? Do you remember? I'd like you to turn to page 13. All right, about line 11, the question I asked you was, do you understand that if you're placed on probation of any kind, you cannot violate any criminal laws of any governmental unit or any special conditions of probation without being subject to a revocation for the balance of the sentence? Your response was yes. Is that correct? All right. And in the next question on line 16, do you understand that you're not allowed to possess or use a firearm while on probation?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, you remember we had that saying? I mean, we had that conversation about that? Okay, all right. On the next page, on page 14, you remember, and this is, I just wanted to kind of just point this out to you. Do you remember we had that conversation about you run the risk of subjecting yourself to additional charges if you have a firearm? Remember on page 14 about line 11, I want you to read that to yourself. That's not what you're being associated today with, but you remember we had a conversation, we had a lot of conversation about firearms, and Ms. Love's right. About 6 things in this plea colloquy talk about firearms.
Yes,
so do you remember us talking about that?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. And Mr. Greer, you remember on page 21, I asked you how old you were and about your family?
Yes, Your Honor.
And about how, you know, we talked to you about being put on a curfew. That's on page 22.
Yes, Your Honor.
You remember that?
Yes.
Okay, all right. And then turn to page 26 at the very top of the page. You remember me talking to you about, this is me, the court. You shall possess no guns during the term of your sentence or any time after unless your right to have it or possess a firearm has been restored. All right? And your answer? Yes, Your Honor. Is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
On that same page on line 19, also, when we talked about the special conditions of your sentence, also, you will possess no guns during the term of the sentence or at any time thereafter unless your rights are restored. This is a special condition of probation. You remember us talking about that?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. All right, you remember you signed, I want you to turn all the way to the end, it's on page 34. It's dated December the 12th of 2022. It is, the title of it is Office of the Fulton County District Attorney, Atlanta Judicial Circuit. And it's got 1, current charges, 2, negotiated sentence, 3, special conditions of probation, 4, defendant's acknowledgments, and it's your plea agreement. You understand that?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, I want you to turn to that. I want you to take a look at paragraph number 2, negotiated sentence. B, in that particular paragraph. What does that say?
Defendant should possess no gun during the term of the sentence and the other after should be restored.
Defendant shall possess no guns during the term of the sentence or at any time thereafter unless his right to do is restored. Is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. And your signature is on page 37. Is that correct? That you've read this agreement, you've had an opportunity to speak to Mr. Russ, Ms. Norman about this agreement, and no other promises other than the ones made in the document in furtherance of this agreement. And you gave this freely, voluntarily entered into this agreement without force, threat, or coercion. Is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. So it's not like we didn't have a conversation about this firearm, right?
Yes, Your Honor.
So, as I mentioned earlier, I don't take pleasure in sending people to prison. It's part of the job and the responsibilities I have as part of what potential consequences are of people's actions. But in this particular circumstance, the state has alleged that you didn't pay your probation fees, and okay, and I've heard evidence that you haven't paid your fees. You owe $141.08 in fees. You haven't started any of the community service in this particular case, so I find those to be proven violations. But, you know, those are relatively minor. I mean, we still want you to adhere to all the conditions, but they're, of the three violations and the grade of those violations, they're not as severe as getting a new case, okay? A new charge. And part of the special condition was that you're not supposed to possess a gun. And the state was very clear, and in Ms. Pretty testified earlier about the things that you were given in terms of your reporting in states 1 and 2. And then Ms. Goodacre came in and specifically you signed acknowledgement of firearm in states 3 and prohibition of possessing firearms or ammunition in states 4. And then I saw states 6 and 7, which was the Glock 9 that was taken from the vehicle, which you were the driver, shaded 3 to 4 inches from that. So I find that based upon the evidence presented in this case, the state has proven by a preponderance of the evidence that you have violated your probation in the 3 means as set forth in paragraph 4 on the petition. Now, in terms of the revocation, your attorney has asked me to consider a revocation of 2 years. And I certainly respect her, and I certainly respect that, you know, you don't know unless you ask. The issue I find aggravating in this particular circumstances are several. You got arrested with a gun within 6 months of you being placed on probation. And I agree with the state that you're not a candidate for probation because all you had to do is just complete your probation and do what you're supposed to do. Instead, you were riding around the car with a gun in violation of your probation and what this court explicitly had conversations with you about. Explicitly, on the record. And for that reason, sir, I'm going to revoke the balance of 9 years and 6 months. And you will serve that in the Department of Corrections. And that will be the sentence of the court. Anything further? No, Your Honor. All right, that'll be the sentence of the court. Okay, we're in recess.